Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in this great, grand, and glorious world. You have arrived at the Awakened Mother Show, which is a show that is dedicated to uncovering, discovering, and exploring those topics that might be a little off the mainstream. It is a joy and a delight to be here and to be your host. And today I have someone that I'm just so excited about. So I have the pleasure of bringing to you and sharing with you Gabe Brown, who is a regenerative farmer and a strong proponent of soil health. He has a farm with his family in North Dakota. And I have to say, I really think that farmers are the new rock stars, right? Because how many people dedicate their life and their business to making sure that soil is clean and that you have food that is life affirming. So Gabe is one of the featured farmers in the film Common Ground, which was the sequel to Kiss the Ground. And he's here today to share his 6 principles of soil and to give you some insight, information, and support on how you as a consumer, as a homesteader, as the family member that you are, how you can do this in your own home, whatever your home is. So please help me welcome to the stage, Gabe Brown.
Thank you, Wendy. It's great to be with you today.
So good to have you here. I was so inspired by you and moved when I saw you in the film. And then when I got to meet you and your humility and your wisdom just speak volumes. You know that phrase, who you are thunders so loudly, you need not utter a word. I believe that might be Emerson or Thoreau, but that's how I felt when I met you.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that at your farm, I was reading about your farm online, and it says that faith, family, and working with the natural resources that God provided allows us a meaningful life. We enjoy using these resources to regenerate landscapes for a sustainable future.
That's what it's about to us. We realize that we must take care of God's creation. We are but caretakers of his creation. And in so doing, we produce the food and fiber that feed and clothe the world. And that's what it's about to us. It's not about trying to impose our will on nature. It's about how do we work with nature so that we can be productive, provide a living for ourselves, and to provide nutrient-dense food in a way that allows future generations the opportunity to be sustainable. I really believe, Wendy, that the past 80 plus years, we've gone on a path of degradation. We've accelerated that degradation due to the mantra, we have to produce more and more, greater and greater yields, but at what cost? And because of that, our ecosystems have been degrading. We've been losing biodiversity. We've been degrading the health of the soil. We can no longer infiltrate water. We can't hold water there. Really, what you're seeing culminate in what is called today climate change is really about the degradation that mankind has caused. Now, not all because of farmers and ranchers, it's because of industry, etc. But on my own ranch, I have to be concerned about that. What can I do on my own ranch to reverse that degradation? And that's why we practice what's called regenerative agriculture.
It's beautiful. It's so interesting. I'm a city girl, city woman. So farming has not ever been part of my life, really. And yet when I was a little girl, I grew tomatoes and some vegetables in the back. And it was so exciting to just see this miracle happening. Just put the little seed in and then it grows. So will you share? I know Vandana Shiva talks about the seeds. I think she's also a rock star. And what can we do? How can we, those of us that have never really been exposed to farming, that feel this awareness within us, like we got to do something different for ourselves and our kids?
Yep, that's a great question. And the way I like to look at it is each and every one of us needs to realize that eating is an agricultural act. It takes agriculture for us to consume food. So what can consumers do? Well, consumers are partially to blame for this degradation that's occurred, for the current agricultural production model. You see, after World War II, consumers, rightfully so, they wanted copious amounts of food. Well, that's led us on this 80+ year journey of producing more and more, as I said, but at what cost? You know, we've lost a tremendous amount of biodiversity. There was a study recently done in Germany, over 75% loss in biodiversity over the past 25 years in the country of Germany. We're seeing that here in the United States. And take a look at what's happening. And this is what I equate. All this comes together and manifests itself in human health. You know, we have a human health crisis going on. Just look here in the United States, for instance. ADD, ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, cancer, they're all on the rise and at alarming rates. And I contend a large part of that is due to the fact that we no longer have food that is providing the nutrients we need. I tell people that we no longer consume food, we consume food-like substances. It's not really that tomato that you talked about growing when you were a child. Tomatoes aren't like that today. And it's because what we're finding is as we degrade soil health and the soil is not able to function properly, it doesn't have the microbiology in it. It doesn't have the resilience, the water holding capacity in the soils. We're not able to get these phytonutrient compounds into our food. We're doing some real groundbreaking research now that's showing that food grown in and on healthy soils is 69% higher in vitamins, up to 239% higher in fatty acid profiles, 67% lower in oxidative stress markers, which of course leads to less heart disease, etc. So it really is incumbent on every person who consumes food, and of course we all do, to vote with their buying dollar and help change the production model to one of being regenerative.
Those statistics are so sobering. And I believe that America is really foundationally built upon the more concept. And there's so many toxins that you spoke about that contribute to the chronic health issues that adults and children, I mean, 54% of our children have chronic health issues. So regenerative farming, what are the 6 principles?
So there's 6 principles. These are time-tested ecological principles. They've been around for eons of time. And no matter where I travel all over the world, and I have the good fortune, I'm on hundreds of farms and ranches all over the world every year now. And these 6 principles are the same. Very briefly, the first principle is that of context. You have to farm and ranch within the context of your environment. I tell people there's a reason bananas don't grow in North Dakota. right? We have winter in North Dakota. Bananas are not going to survive here. So you have to grow the crops and raise the species of livestock that fit your environment. The second principle is least amount of mechanical and chemical disturbance possible. Okay. In nature, yeah, you have burrowing rodents and worms, but you don't have this copious amounts of tillage that turns the soil over and destroys the soil. And in nature, you certainly don't have the large amount of chemicals and synthetics that we use, that are used so often in agriculture today. The third principle is that of armor on the soil. Walk into a forest or walk out on the prairie. How much bare soil do you see? No, we only see bare soil where mankind's actions have caused them to occur. Nature always tries to cover the soil to protect it from wind erosion and water erosion and to hold the moisture in the soil rather than evaporate. The fourth principle is that of diversity. Nature abhors a monoculture. It thrives on diversity. Yet, what do we do as mankind? We take large tracts of land and only plant a single species of grain, fruit, vegetable, or run a single species of livestock on that land for a long period. That's not how nature functions properly. The fifth principle is that of the living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. I mean, those of us who are further north in the hemisphere know that spring of the year, you may still have snow on the ground, but you'll see plants starting to peek through the snow, crocuses appearing, etc. Nature is always trying to collect that free solar energy, photosynthesis, in order to feed the life beneath the soil. And the final principle is that of animal and insect integration. Ecosystems do not function properly without animals and insects. You know, how were the rich prairie soils formed in the Great Plains? They were formed from large herds of ruminants, bison, elk, deer, moving across those grasslands, grazing, then moving on, allowing lengthy recovery times. That's what forms our deep soils. Today, mankind has removed those animals from the landscape, put them into confined feeding operations. That is not conducive to healthy ecosystems. So wherever I travel and try and educate others as to these time-tested principles, they're the same. And these 6 principles drive the 4 ecosystem processes. And those 4 processes are simply the energy cycle, sunlight, the water cycle, water infiltrating into the soil and then being held there because of the carbon in the soil, the nutrient cycle, and that's the biology in the soil, transferring nutrients to the plants, and then biodiversity is the 4th cycle. So those 6 principles drive the 4 cycles. No matter where you go, even in your garden, those are the same. Now, some people say, but Gabe, I can't have animals in the garden. Well, I tell them this. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people on this planet. Wow. So don't think in a garden you don't have animals and insects, and you have pollinators and predator insects. And, you know, too often we see an insect, we think it's a pest. For every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 plus species that are beneficial. Why do we want to kill that pest? Let's promote the beneficials. So even in our garden, in our backyard, these 6 principles drive the 4 processes. It's all the same everywhere.
That is so beautiful. Really. I mean, principles to live by, really. If you widen the lens, these are basic principles.
And it doesn't matter, you know, in my current occupation now, I'm consulting all over the world on farms and ranches. We can do this in a flower pot, on a deck, in the middle of the city. We can do it in a garden. We can do it on a small farm. Our largest client has 2.1 million acres. We can do it over vast areas. It doesn't matter. It's the same.
So your client that has 2.1 million acres, are they growing multiple varieties, or is it also livestock? And where can we buy their? I mean, you sell.
It's primarily a livestock operation. Okay. They're running on vast grasslands with a tremendous amount of wildlife, tremendous biodiversity of plants, animals, insects. That's what they raise.
Wow. And I have a question that I'm listening to, and I'm thinking, how does the government feel about this? Or big ag?
Well, that's a great question, and one I get asked often. And here's what I tell people. We have to realize it took us it really accelerated after World War II, even though we were on a path of degradation before then. We have to remember the Dust Bowl in the 1930s was caused from too much tillage and not enough armor on the soil surface, okay? We need to remember that.
Do people know that?
Pardon me?
Excuse me for interrupting you, but do people know that?
Well, they need to know that. That's what caused it. Overgrazing of our pastures and excessive tillage without keeping that soil covered. Yeah, that's what caused the Dust Bowl, okay? But what really accelerated soil degradation was also the use of all these synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and et cetera. And it's been a long, slow decline since then. So what I'm saying is, over the past 80 years, we've developed this production model where now the equipment used in farming today has gotten larger and larger. Farmers are farming more acres per person. We're applying more synthetic fertilizer, more pesticides, more fungicides. So you have this agro-industrial complex that's all driven by this. Then you have all the infrastructure. You have the equipment manufacturers. You have the grain dealers, who buy the grain, are getting larger and larger. You have the grain growers associations themselves, the wheat growers and corn growers. They want to see more and more produced because their budgets are dependent on how many bushels of those crops are produced. So you have such large infrastructure in place now. How do we turn that? Well, the way we turn the tide and the way we get agriculture focused on human nutrition and providing nutrient-dense food is every consumer needs to vote with their buying dollar. They need to support farmers and ranchers who are practicing regenerative agriculture. So how do they do that? I tell people, get to know your farmer or rancher. Every city has a farmer's market, just about. Know where your food comes from. Look at that label and read, is this food being produced regeneratively? What are they doing? Spend a little time researching. Your health depends on it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's so interesting because I learned about glyphosate. I mean, through my own health, challenge, I began in my 20s, I began looking at labels and then researching to the best of my ability what those really long, polysyllabic words meant. Like, what is that? And so I learned about glyphosate and chlorpyrifos and then also the genetically modified seeds. And I'd go to farmers markets and I would go up to the people and the farmers representatives that bring produce. And I would say, so is your soil pesticide free, or do you use, non-glyphosate or non-GMO? And it was some of them would look at me and they make this, well, we don't really use pesticides, but we can't can't say that we're organic because the hoops that they have to jump through to be declared organic are really costly. And then others didn't even know what I was talking about.
And unfortunately, realize that all farmers and ranchers want to do a good job.
Yes.
They want to do the right thing, but it's a business, and they're in that business to make money. Well, because consumers are not demanding these regeneratively grown and raised products, they're producing it in a way that they can produce more yield, more pounds, more bushels.
Right.
And that then leads them down a path of using those products. Now, there's a lot of us out there who are not, and we're focused on soil health and using these regenerative practices, the principles to drive the processes. And more consumers are demanding them. We are actually being approached now by major businesses who want to purchase regeneratively grown and raised products. So consumers are becoming aware, demanding it. The more that happens, the quicker we're going to drive change. Wonderful. And then, Wendy, the important thing is, then we can really use food as preventative medicine.
Yes.
And that's what we need to get to.
Food as medicine. Yeah. And protecting the earth, cherishing. I remember in the movie, The Common Ground, there was this very stark, striking field that you stood on. It was completely bare.
Yeah.
And then there was, I don't know if it was, it looked like it was weeds.
It was my farm right next to it. Yeah. There was a major windstorm. We had 3 days of sustained winds over 50 miles an hour. And it blew, because my neighbor did not have armor on the soil, protecting that soil, it actually blew topsoil, actually inches of topsoil away. And it actually destroyed his crop for the year.
Oof.
Whereas right next to it, my soil covered growing plants. You didn't even know that we had a windstorm, except for the fact that I had drifts of his soil in my fields. It blew off his land onto mine.
That's amazing. So can you share a little bit about what led you to be so committed to regenerative farming?
Sure. So like you, I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in town. Okay. But I became very interested in agriculture when I was in junior high and high school, started working on farms. Then I happened to marry my college sweetheart who was from a farm, and her folks asked if we'd be interested in taking over the farm. I was excited to move on to that farm. My wife, not so much. She always said she married a city kid to get off the farm, but I led her back to it. And I learned to farm from my father-in-law, but he was practicing conventionally with tillage, with fertilizers, with pesticides, etc. That's how I learned. But one thing about me, not being from a farm, I was always curious, and I'm an avid learner. I tell people I'm a lifelong learner. The more I know I don't know. So I always try and learn more. Yeah. And I had read about no-till. So when my wife and I purchased the part of the farm from her parents, I sold all the tillage equipment and bought a no-till drill. It just made sense to me because I didn't want to till the soil. But then what really drove us down this path, in 1995, the day before we were going to start harvesting our crop, we lost our entire crop in a hailstorm. So that was pretty devastating to young families starting out. 1996 came along, we lost our entire crop to hailstorm again. 1997 came along, we dried out, it was a major drought, nobody harvested anything. 1998 came along, I lost 80% of the crop to hail. So those 4 years of hail and drought left me $1.5 million in debt. Back in 1998, that was a lot of money for a young family starting out. but I had started to notice a change because we hadn't tilled, because the hail laid armor on the soil, because I wasn't able to put up feed for my livestock. I let them graze what grew back in the fields. I was integrating animals back onto the cropland. We suddenly noticed earthworms in the soil. Songbirds were coming back to the ranch. Wildlife was coming back. And it really dawned on me that God was showing me through those 4 years the principles and the processes. I didn't know it back then, but I was smart enough to be able to observe that the land, even though we hadn't harvested the crop in 4 years, was healthier. And the wildlife knew it, my animals, my livestock knew it. I could see it, I could hear it, I could smell it. And that sent me on this journey. Because we had no money, I couldn't apply those fertilizers and pesticides and all those chemicals. And I really realized that all I had been doing in my career up to that point was trying to kill something, either a weed or a pest or something. And I realized that farming and ranching should be about encouraging life, not killing life. And so that really sent my family and I on this journey. And I call it, it's been a journey of changing from dirt to soil.
It's beautiful. And you have a book.
That is the book. That is the name of the book. From dirt to soil.
Yeah. It's beautiful. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about being returned the years that the locusts had taken. And I'm butchering that statement to make it work for this, but it really feels like that was part of what your journey was to really.
It absolutely was. And unfortunately, we're seeing that today. You know, there's large parts of North Dakota, Montana that over the past 3 years have been very dry, and the grasshoppers it's just a plague. They're losing entire crops over tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres. And if you study and understand the life cycle of a grasshopper, it takes bare soil for that grasshopper to lay its eggs and then for them to hatch there. Well, if we're not following the principles, we have bare soil, and then you get a drought, it only compounds that because you're not growing that cover, that armor. And I think we're seeing that again. You know, we need to get back to the principles to drive the processes to increase biodiversity and get the whole ecosystem healthy again.
That's wonderful.
And you look at what's happening every spring. What do we see in the Northern Hemisphere? We see flooding. Well, why do we have flooding along our waterways, in our streams and rivers? It's because we're no longer able to infiltrate water into the soil. Why can't we infiltrate water? We don't have well aggregated soil. That's because we don't have the biodiversity of plant species to build soil aggregates. When my wife and I purchased the ranch from her parents in 1993, we could only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour. Now that's not very much. Oftentimes you get a thunderstorm, we'll get 1 to 2 inches. Well, now today, soil scientists have documented on our ranch, we can infiltrate 32 inches per hour, which Bismarck, North Dakota has never received 30 inches of moisture in a year, let alone in an hour. Wow. But think of what that does. There's going to be no water running off of our farm. It's going to infiltrate into the soil. When we purchase the ranch, our organic matter, and think of organic matter as 58% carbon, so think of it as the carbon in the soil. We all hear with climate change, there's too much carbon in the atmosphere. Well, we were at 1.7% organic matter in our soils. Now I just received a soil test last week, 9.4% organic matter. For every 1% organic matter increase in your soil, you'll hold an extra 20,000 gallons of water per foot. So think of the resilience and think of the sponge that is. Think of less water in the streams and the rivers, so less flooding during that spring season. Also think of what that means in a drought. My soils are resilient because I have that sponge that holds that water. Also think of what it means for climate change, the amount of carbon we've been able to take out of the atmosphere and move back into the soil. This is all, I tell people, Wendy, it's not rocket science. It's really not that complicated. It's simply adhering to nature's time-tested ecological principles.
It makes so much sense.
Well, I'm a pretty simple man. It's got to be easy for me to understand it.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I would love to find out, what can people do immediately? So people listen to this, they take in what you're saying, they're moved like I am, like, come on, let's gather everybody and start doing this. What's the first, how do we start? Where do we start?
Yep. Where you start is with education. You need to become educated yourself as a consumer. Okay. What are you putting in your mouth? What are you putting in your children's mouths? Right? We need to understand where our food comes from, how it was grown and raised. And people think, oh, but that's a lot of work. And I just respond this way. What's your health worth? Right. What's your health worth? What's the health of your children worth? Right. Okay. Right. If you look at that label and you don't recognize what's on that label, you shouldn't be eating it. Okay. Right? Right. You know?
Right. Right. Well, I'm writing down these notes because I think it is really important. And then, so if somebody goes to, like, I know a lot of people where I live, they shop at Whole Foods, which now has genetically modified ingredients in their food. They put it on the label. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine. I honestly cannot imagine, like, looking at a label and going, oh, genetically modified ingredients. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to make this an advertisement, but several individuals and myself, we were tired of the greenwashing. We started a company called Regenerative. And yes, that's a made-up word in order for us to get trademarks. And we're pleased to announce Whole Food accepted our standards. It's the most complete standards in the industry. We are the only USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service regenerative approved label in the United States. It's called Regenerative, and you are starting now to see Regenerative products just show up on store shelves. And our goal is to verify. We have the most stringent, by that I mean complete verification process out there at 65 different data points and observations that are taken to prove that that food is grown in and on regenerative soils. And then we're proving it all the way through the supply chains, through the brands. And there's our Regenerative label that is showing up on packages. Now, in saying that, you know, it's not everywhere yet. And so I really encourage all people to just get to know your farmers and ranchers. Go to your farmers markets. Go to those stores that source locally and ask questions. Go to restaurants when you go out to eat. Patronize those restaurants that are selling, serving meals made out of local food, and find out how that food is grown and raised. Vote with your buying dollar. That's the best thing you can do.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm so happy to hear about that.
Yeah. You're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the
near my goodness. I will help, like, spread the word. Like, that's great. That's wonderful to hear, because I know when I heard about that people were accepting that there was genetically modified. And it's so fascinating to me, Gabe. I'll still talk to people and they'll have this surprise when I talk about genetically modified organisms. There'll be a glaze that comes over their eyes. And I'll be like, do you know about this? Do you know what it does to your microbiome, to your brain, to, you know?
And unfortunately, Wendy, it's become so commonplace that it's being passed as, oh, it's fine. Okay, if all these things are fine, why do we see the incidences of these chronic illnesses that we're seeing today?
Right.
It's not fine.
Right.
It's not fine.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness you have Regenify. That is great. And can also, I'm curious, can people buy product directly from your farm, or are there other?
They can. My son and his wife now run the ranch. It's called Nourished by Nature. And Nourished by Nature ships throughout the lower 48 states directly to people's doors. Wonderful. And they can buy grass-finished beef, grass-finished lamb, pastured pork, eggs, honey, chicken, all born and raised on the farm.
Yeah, I was reading about your farm. You have, I think, when this was written, which was, I believe, a couple of years ago, this article, you have 5,000 acres that you have.
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah, and that your livestock and everything that you grow is grown the way that you talk about, and very humanely and very lovingly, and so that's beautiful.
Yep, our animals have one great life, one bad moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gabe. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your time. I would love to have you come back, because I feel like people are going to have questions about, oh, I live in the city, or how can I start? Or even you mentioned gardening or something, but I really want to get the word out about Regenify is it Regenified or Regenify?
Yeah, Regenified, FIED.
Okay, great. So where can people find you? How can they connect?
Yeah, so people can go on our understandingag.com website. We have a resource tab with a lot of links. We have podcasts. One of our consultants is putting on, she calls it the Green Thumb Chronicles, which is a segment on gardening and how to implement these principles in a gardening setup. So you can also find out more on our Soil Health Academy website. We have a nonprofit that we founded to educate anyone and all who are interested in soil health. So you can check out those websites.
That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. Couple of last questions. Do you for us to reclaim the sovereignty of the land, to really help reconstitute that awareness?
I don't think it's possible. I believe that it's imperative that we do so. I work with hundreds of farmers and ranchers who are doing farm, ranch, in their vineyard, in their orchard, in their vegetable. It's being done everywhere, all over the world. We just need so.
Excellent. And the last question is, Gabe was sitting here with us.
Oh, that's a question that's a good one. It's the future, because years ago I would have never thought that I'd be visiting with you, that I would be visiting with so many people, and I'd be spending 275 days on the road, traveling all over, talking about soil health. But, you know, no matter what came before my wife and I, we just really believed, okay, God is showing us something. He's showing us a path. How are we going to react to that? And we needed to look at it as a blessing and a challenge. And that's what we did. And, you know, things have turned out really, really well.
Wow. Thank you. It is a joy to be with you, Gabe. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your commitment to really.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been a pleasure being with you.
Yeah. So hang on for 1 second after I remove from the stage. So here we go. All right, everybody. So thank you for being here with us today. I will make sure that you have all of the links to connect with Gabe and educate yourself and to support Regenified. Because if there's anything that I know is that you are a powerful creator and that you are the one who is the CEO of your family. So you get to set the tone. You get to do this for yourself and for your children and the next 7 generations as Gabe and his family have done. So thank you so much for being here. You can hit like, subscribe on Spotify, on iTunes, on YouTube, on all the places where you get your platform podcasts. And I will see you next time. Peace and richest blessings.